share my screen. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody had a good 4th of July weekend. It's a little warm today. It was a little warm yesterday, but it's never too warm to talk about gardens. So, and how gardens can really be, something that's the glue of a community. So we have a great topic today. Before I jump into there, I do want to just mention about GreenSpot, which I think everybody out there is already a member. I just know it, but in case you're not, GreenSpot's a program that really does inspire, educates, recognizes, and recognizes households, community groups, businesses that adopt sustainable practices. And we kind of look at the 5 areas of sustainability. We look at conserving, protecting water, conserving energy, reducing waste, green transportation, and education, inspiring folks. We also, taking a step back at the city level with our Sustainable Columbus initiative, we view sustainability kind of like this. When you have environment, economy, and equity all going in the same direction, that's when you really have sustainability. And I would even say it's better than sustainability, because that's when you really thrive as a community, and that's what we should be aiming for. So I talked a little bit about GreenSpot. I'm not going to read the numbers up there, but you can kind of see we have a number of members that make commitments to go green. It's free to join, free to be a member. These are some of the savings that our GreenSpot universe has seen over the years. We started in 2008, and we grow each year. We have over 21,000 members right now. That kind of gets us to today's conversation, which is really growing gardens and growing community. And we have an excellent panelist here, a guest here today, Julialynne Walker. She is the market manager of the Brownsville Growers Market, the principal facilitator of the Brownsville Agri Academy, and the site manager of the Brownsville Bethany Community Church and Mammy Mac Community Garden. She has facilitated a 7-month course in urban farming sponsored by the USDA, the Farm Services Agency, that addressed the existence of food deserts here in Central Ohio. And she serves as a mentor to area gardeners, currently 24 family gardens and 5 community gardens. She lectures on issues of the African diaspora and urban farming to colleges and the general community. Julialynne's local community activities have included serving on the board of the Columbus Landmarks Foundation and the advisory committee for the Columbus Afrocentric Early College, Columbus African American Digital Collection for the Columbus Metropolitan Library and Pan-African Connections. She is currently the president of the Franklin Park Civic Association and heads the committee developing collaboration among community gardens on the Near East Side. She has been honored as Phenomenal Woman of the Year, ComFest Honored Activist of the Year, and with the Julialynne Walker Community Learning Garden at the King's Arts Complex. So I really appreciate you taking your time today. You are busy with doing
not at all.
really important work. So I hope you had a good weekend, Julialynne, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, please go to the opening one, and then we can just go straight to the next one. Yes, thank you very much for providing this opportunity, because it's not often that we're able to share space. And I was very surprised when you actually gave the topic, because you were very clear. We're not going to talk about plants. You got somebody else to talk about that later. We want to talk about growing community. And so to start off, I have to say, I am a Pan-Africanist. I come out of a perspective that sees Africa at the center of the community. And we have to look at that regardless of what we're talking about. So when I'm talking about food and I'm talking about gardens, then I'm looking at the contributions Africa has made to the culinary, or the global culinary perspective or environment. And again, we're going to start asking, well, why? Why don't we know this? What are the things we do or don't know? And where is that information? So as we move on, I say that the community, next slide, please, starts with the continent, but we also look at who are some of the other people who have been environmental activists before me. And someone who I don't have on the list, but may be common to some Columbus people, would be James Preston Poindexter. And he is noted as a civic leader, religious leader, on the school board, involved in the Republican Party politics and all that. But what some people don't know is that he was also the first African-American member of the Bureau of Forestry and Land Management. So for me, he's the first notable African-American environmentalist in Columbus, and I like to hold him up as such. But also I want to share with you just a few other people who have made significant contributions to addressing environmentalism from an African American perspective. And we start with Jerome Ringo, who has really dedicated his life to reducing the dependency of the United States on foreign oil and even oil overall. We look at Dr. Beverly Wright, who developed the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, who looked very closely at the relationship between industry and land and the location of communities and the political decisions that were made about the use of land. John Francis, the planet walker, he's walked for 22 years without ever using motorized transport, and he went for another 17 years without speaking because he realized that, you know, he needed to listen more to everything because it was just so clear to him that there are certain things we should not be doing, and there must be really deep reasons why people weren't doing it. So he needed to listen more to people, and so he didn't speak for another 17 years, and somehow during that time, he achieved a bachelor, a master, and a doctorate. Majora Carter, yes, she's recognized as a MacArthur Fellow, which is already a touch of genius, but she started with addressing garbage dumping and just looking at how piles of garbage were collecting in her community and weren't being removed, and the impact it had in terms of rodent infestation and disease transmission. And then from there, she began to make the link in terms of environment and economics and social justice, and has really become renowned for urban planning from an environmental perspective. Following her is Audrey and Frank Peterman, who really are making a unique contribution in connecting African American communities to publicly owned land in the United States. And most publicly owned land, yes, are our local municipal parks, but it's also the national park system. And so ensuring that, you know, the national parks that are close to sites of significant African American historical interest, you know, include that in the interpretive displays that are placed throughout such parks. And then we have John W. Mitchell, who was the first African American to really be accorded a position as a director within the USDA Extension Services servicing the South. And it was in the 40s, and it is again an example of, you know, looking at why it took so long, you know, some of the contributions that he made while he was there, and some of the contributions that that have been made by others who have followed in his footsteps. Next, please. And so when I bring all that down then to where I am, and this is the really the Brownsville area on this map identified as King Lincoln, and just above the word King is a star. And that is my approximation for 17th and Mount Vernon, which is where the Brownsville Growers Market and some of our other activities are located. But then the Brownsville area as a whole surrounds that site, and I'll talk about some of the activities. But what I'd like to address is that this is a food desert and a food swamp. There are three arrows on the diagram. The one to my left, above the word downtown, is pointing to the Hills Market. At 1.3 miles, that is the closest market to Brownsville, but it is also one of the most expensive stores in Columbus. So when we look at the definition for a food desert, whether or not there is healthy, affordable, accessible food, we find that it may be healthy, but it's not affordable and it's barely accessible because it should be less than a mile. The next arrow is above, close to the words near East Columbus, and it's pointing to the Trolley Hill gas station. And I'm sorry, Turkey Hill, the Turkey Hill gas station at Nelson and Broad. And so the Turkey Hill gas station really started out as a gas station, but in light of the lack of food of accessibility within the community, it has really pumped up its canned or shelf goods as well as some fresh goods. But again, it comes at a price. So it is, again, over a mile. It is not necessarily fresh, and it's because it's slightly more expensive, it's not affordable. The last arrow, which is at the very edge of the map under the words East Broad Street, points to the Kroger store at Main and Nelson. And this is the largest full service grocery store that at 2.3 miles is closest to the Brownsville community. So it may, and it has relatively affordable produce. So it may be affordable, but it's not accessible in terms of distance. And there's some issues in terms of it's healthy, it's affordable, um, and I'm blanking, but it's okay. So one other thing I want to highlight, though, is that as the various grocery stores have not come into the area, that has represented a vacuum that's been filled by 3 to 4 dollar stores. And these dollar stores, I recently read an article. I was quite surprised because I knew they're dollar stores, they're cheap, they're undercutting, but they're doing it by using out-of-date produce. They're doing it by using items that have been actually declared unsafe for human consumption to some extent. The most surprising thing I read was that the actual receipt tape for the dollar store is carcinogenic. And whereas we may, as customers, only get it once, or you look at it, you might have it in your hand and you put it in your bag. But when we think about the staff that regularly for 8 hours is handling that paper, we realize that there are health risks to the community to the people who are serving the community. So and in terms of it being a food swamp, that definition goes to where there is an excess of fast food outlets that are serving highly caloric, generally fried, and fairly expensive per serving food. And we do have that within this area as well, from Wendy's to KFC to the others. So this is a community in which I function generally. Next slide, please. And it started with Bethany Brownsville Community Garden, and it wasn't that big long name. I returned to Columbus after an absence of many years, and was slightly frustrated with my inability to find employment, although I had come back being semi-retired. And I began to take my frustrations out on the land, basically. And I began with a small area behind the Bethany Presbyterian Church, the only African American Presbyterian church in Columbus that is slightly over 110 years old. And I began growing tomatoes for the community lunch program. And this is a lunch program that's served every Saturday for anyone who's hungry, come in and help themselves. But by starting that, we moved until we were able to basically create a garden that covers the width and breadth of an entire city lot, so where one house was. But we ran into many problems that many others run into, in that a third to half of the garden really cannot be dug deeply because it's been infilled with the house that was there previously. And so many of my African friends ask me, well, Why are there so many raised beds? Why don't people just plant in the earth? Because the earth isn't good for growing. And so because there are fears of lead-based paint, because there are issues around asbestos that may have been used in siding or for insulation, people use the raised beds as we do. And but becoming involved with the community garden and developing it led me to becoming involved with other issues connected to the community garden, and then working more closely in assisting others to grow. Next slide, please. And so 2 years ago, I looked at how could we communicate with more people in a more effective way. And like many folk, I developed the Brownsville Agri Academy, which is to be a 10-week course, but it was to be a course taught in person at the OSU Community Services Extension Center. Again, and that's just next door at Monroe and 17th. And the class was to have started the third week of March 2020. Well, we all know what happened the second week of March or the first week of March 2020. And I started scrambling like everyone else. And people said, well, you just have to take it to Zoom. And I'm like, Zoom? What's a Zoom? Well, I have quickly learned what a Zoom is, and now what a WebEx is, and a wild stream, and Microsoft Teams, and all the rest. But we moved quickly to put it online. And of course, many of the participants were no more familiar with how to do it than I was, but we worked together, we learned together, and we grew together. And so it is a 10-week general introduction to gardening, and it's open to all interest levels and all ages. We've done 3 classes, spring and fall, and then the spring of this year, and we'll do a fall session in 2021. In August, we opened it up to, we had some site visits because people wanted to see, and I had built it in originally, but with COVID, we weren't sure whether we could do it. But once the restrictions were lifted, we said, fine, let's do some site visits. And people were able to visit each other's gardens and see what people had done and how they had done it. So the Agri Academy it is and was virtual. It is simply where people are in their growing level and providing the information, and that's it. And it is 70 to 70, 7 to 70. And one of my most consistent students is actually 7. I think he might be 8 now, but he took great responsibility to be on time and be prepared for the sessions. But this was the base to provide general information to as many people as possible. Next slide, please. But we realized that there were people who were very serious for various reasons. Some connected on a cultural basis. I can't tell you how many stories we heard of people who, because their parents or their grandparents or someone in the extended family grew, it just brought back memories. Certainly in terms of COVID, there were people who just wanted to do something at home that they could control and that made a contribution. Other people who would garden all along and just wanted to garden again, but were in living situations that may have that set up certain barriers. If they were renting, they couldn't, dig up the lawn, or they were in a balcony, an apartment, that kind of thing. So we also have people who, is really interesting, who would say they wanted to garden, but they didn't want to get their hands dirty. And I said, well, you have to do that. I mean, what is this about? But that was still a barrier. So I just sat down with a group of folk. I said, okay, let's look at all the considerations, all the barriers, all the objections, and what do we do with it? And we came up basically with Garden in a Box. And we were able to apply for funding, and we were funded for a dozen families, and they were provided, you'll see in the photograph, the bins, plastic bins, and we drilled holes in the bottom, and each family got 3 bins, soil, fertilizer, seeds, and some starter plants. And so this was garden in a box. And we had people take the bins home, and people, put them in their yards or have them on their balconies or their porch or, someplace, and they started growing. And then we visited about every 3 weeks with each family. And then in the interim, people were encouraged to text me with questions or to send photographs. And we had a lot of discussion that way in terms of what was happening. So now, from this general discussion and the provision of general information, some people grew on their own. Other people just said, well, this has just been fun and I just enjoyed listening to it, during this time. But other people were now willing to take it to the next level, and they became the bugs or the Brownsville urban growers. Next slide, please. But now, prior to all of this, in 2018, we actually started the Brownsville Growers Market. And the same slide, 17th and Mount Vernon. We meet every Thursday, 3 to 6 p.m. And it was to provide, it is to provide, healthy food for healthy living within the community. And so we've had a variety of other vendors, some artisan crafters, some nonprofits, some, t-shirt, that kind of thing. And then we have selected events that focus on certain things. So we have plant swaps, and I've been amazed at how popular they are, because some people have a mass of house plants, and they want to trade some of their plant babies. Other people have a number of outdoor plants or food crops, and they want to reduce and share. And so I know one of the plant swaps we had last year, we, as a market, we tried to add to it by, doing something fun. And so we had a raffle, and we had some plants that we were raffling off at the end. And a 14-year-old won one of the plants, and he walked around the rest of it for about an hour holding this plant. And I was like, you really can put it down. You can put it down right here. I will watch it. You can enjoy the market, do what you're doing. And he was like, no, I want to show everybody what I won. And so I often wonder what happened to that plant, whether he took good care of it, because we know what happens sometimes when we bring a puppy or a kitten home, who ends up taking care of it. But it was just very interesting to see his commitment to that plant, at least for the afternoon. And we also try to have live music. Again, not big bands, not big dances, but 1 or 2 people with the keyboards and singing, or just some background music, that kind of thing. And it was very interesting last summer during COVID, and we were really constricted, or conflicted as to whether or not to host the market. But people said, no, 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 you have to host the market. There's no question about it. You have to do the market. And it really became a safe place for people. People came out, we're talking July, August, September, and we know the state was opening up. So people were very comfortable being around each other, observing all the social distancing rules and the sanitizing rules. And we had people who would come and literally just sit in the market, which goes to a point that I want to discuss a bit later. Next, please. And then we have the community gardens. And I mentioned at the beginning that I started in a community garden. But that one really is focusing on supporting a particular activity attached to the church. Mamie Mac Community Garden is a new venture, and it's connected to the Douglas Foundation, which is with the Growing and Growth Collective. And so what we're looking at now, we've moved from the provision of general information to working with people who want to focus on actually growing, and then providing an outlet for people who may want to sell as growers or provide a community where people can come together around food. But we also said that, looking at the discussions that we have with people, we have to begin to look at the food production at a more commercial level. And so the Mamie Mac Community Garden is designed to do that. It is to host a high tunnel that will produce starter plants that will then be distributed to the community as a whole. And in the photo where they're cutting the board, that is a group from the Mission Continues, which is a service organization of former servicemen and women who want to continue to help the community. And they find this community projects and come out and help. But the woman with the red hat or bandana on is actually a bug. So she didn't take the Agri Academy course, but she heard through a friend about bug. She became a Brownsville urban grower, got her hands in, and she already has a garden. She grows on her own, but she wanted to do the garden to kickstart her because she hadn't done it for a while. And then when she heard about the work being done at Mamie Mac, came up to Mamie Mac. And then I found out she actually has a construction background, and she was very excited about helping to build the beds that we have. And so this is her contribution. And then on the other side, you see the beds that we created. And we just wanted to have, we did 2 sets, and we just wanted to have some beds in the front, and these are where they're planted with herbs, so that people could have some place to sit. Because very often in a community garden, there's no place for people to actually relax. Also, it's designed in such a way that the youth can sit on the ground and use the table, the top, as a table. So this it will take us the rest of the year to get the high tunnel up and get the rest completed. But I thought that this was a very good integration of the various programs. Next, please. And so when we look at building agri-hoods, which is for me, this concept of growing gardens, growing a community, now first and foremost, we want to be able to address the decreasing health disparities within the communities, because we know a number of the major health challenges can all be addressed in some way, particularly with early onset through diet. And so if we can begin to change diet, if we can begin to introduce new vegetables, if we can get people to experiment, that will begin to help them to consider changes in their diet that will help to improve their health. And not only for them, we understand that we're actually trying to reverse, 2, if not 3 generations of orientation. So we're actually telling somebody, no, the way your mother cooked, the way your grandmother cooked wasn't good. I know it tasted good, and when you eat, you want to taste something that tastes like that, but unfortunately, it really isn't good for your health. And so if you want your daughter, or if you want to live to see a grandchild, then it's really important that you change your diet now. And these are some of the ways that will happen. And it's really interesting to me how many people come to the market and I'll say, well, just taste this. I didn't do it so much last year because of COVID, of course, but the 2 years previously, and this year I'll do it more selectively. But particularly the little cherry tomatoes, those really sweet ones, it's really interesting to get people to experiment and try something different, because we're so rooted in a very limited range of produce that we don't think creatively beyond that limited range. Also, it's important for us to understand that for us to grow our food in our backyard uses less energy than if we were to go even to an accessible place for food. So rather than think about how am I going to get to Hills Market, or how am I going to get to Kroger, or if I work out, if I add the cost of a taxi, then what does that mean? Let's actually look at encouraging people to grow their own food so that they do not use those resources for transport. Um, and, and it also becomes very interesting how people begin to share the discussion over the garden fence, if you will. Some of the bugs have talked about how they have worked with their neighbors. And in fact, the woman who was, it was a woman and her son that were seated on the of the um, planter at Mamie Mac. She became a bug after watching us and seeing what we were doing. And she's like, well, what are you all, you know, but she's a neighbor down the street from the garden. And she's like, what are you all doing? Well, I want to do that. And so she became a bug. So leading by example, growing the food, not only then it encourages other people, and then they use less energy by also not going for transport. One of the things that there isn't a lot of discussion about, and I know that recently the city of Columbus had a discussion about the urban forestry within Columbus and either reducing or managing it. But because of urban renewal, because of the lack of planning that address, you know, the how the area looks as well as what happens to it, most low-income communities, which again are primarily African American, are really urban sinks. They're hot areas. And so it's important for us to be able to think about how do we reduce that through gardens, which again help to build the community because it reduces the heat and it encourages people to sit on their porches or, you know, to walk down the street or whatever. So that heat reduction, and one of the things that we want to encourage the land bank, for instance, and land banks for all municipal areas is okay, fine. We've been doing the community gardens, and that's a good thing, but also begin to designate some of these vacant lots for food forests. And so if we actually have an area down the street that has fruit trees, that has bramble bushes, and that grows fruit that people can come and just, you know, and help themselves to. One, it encourages a consumption, again, of healthy foods. It increases healthy living, but also the growth of those trees, the growth of the bramble bushes, the growth of ground cover that stabilizes the earth, you know, helps to address this question of being an urban sink area, the heat. And it also provides a place for people just to come and sit and you know and just enjoy and again talk and exchange recipes about how we do. I know that recently I do community history tours, and I took a group 2 weeks ago, and there was we passed a cherry tree, and I just reached up and started taking them down and eating and looking at them, and they kind of looked at me, and a few of them reached up and grabbed, and they were like, well, what is it? And I'm like, okay, this is a fairly, you know, literate, fairly intelligent group, and you don't know cherries on a tree? You know, I mean, this was a fairly, you know, upscale group. And no, they really didn't. And so we have to reintroduce, you know, where our food comes from, you know, so that people really understand it in a very a specific way. And then also, it encourages something that we've talked about in other contexts is food foraging. And so we ought to be able to put, for instance, on the you know, they call it, well, the strip in between the sidewalk and the, you know, the street. Yes, the city does provide certain trees in certain areas, but none of them are fruit trees. And so I know the city has various arguments about, well, you know, it'll make a mess or who'll take care of it. But I think that if you do put it out, then there are people who will begin to take care of it. So we ought to encourage foraging where people do recognize food within their community and feel free to help themselves to it. The next point in terms of addressing emotional and social trauma, and really, in part, I began my presentation there when I said that when I came back, I became very frustrated at not being able to find the kind of job that I wanted, even though I came back as a semi-retiree and I thought, oh, I just work for fun. I still wanted something that I thought was appropriate for what I wanted to do. And when I couldn't find that, I became very frustrated with myself, and I needed something to be able to, to take that frustration out in a healthy way. And so that's just one example of of the kinds of things that go on. And then there are far, far more serious examples of the, kinds of emotional strains that people are undergoing. But I know that when I talk with people who work in our gardens and who work in their gardens, almost without fail, people talk about how working with the land really relaxes them, really reduces stress, really encourages them to think more calmly, to consider their issues in from a wider perspective, and to be able to interact with other people in a different way. I know that very often, or in the past, there have been times that I've been working in the garden, and people have come by and said very clearly, well, why are you doing that? Why are why are you getting your hands dirty? You look like you could be working in an office. And with unfortunately, because of the way agriculture and farming has been denigrated and has been linked to enslavement within African American culture, the perception still among certain people is that we need to get as far from that as possible. And unfortunately, that is really leading to is becoming a problem within the community because becomes a way to shut off an area of professional and creative development, career development that really would be quite useful for many within the community. And so that's the last point in terms of provides alternatives. Right now, Columbus does not teach agriculture or anything connected to agriculture in the public school system, and I think that that's a problem. I think they're remiss in not doing that. Um, Certainly, I'm currently working with the Columbus Afrocentric Early College to develop a food sovereignty curriculum based in Afrocentricity. And so it's very interesting to me to and then connect that to the state-based standards. Okay, so it's really this big puzzle because it's clear to me that you know where the food comes from, or how we connect to it in different historical periods. But then tying it to the math curriculum or the science curriculum, becomes a unique task. But um, the bottom line is that all of us, everybody, should have a basic understanding of agriculture and should be able to consider it as a possibility for employment or part-time enjoyment, at some point in our lives. And so to have a complete area, and one that's so fundamental to our existence, completely blocked off from those of the next generation, I find quite frustrating. And so I think that exposure to community growing in the agri-hoods provides an example for youth to see, okay, well, perhaps I can do this, or perhaps this is something that I could be interested in, or I can see how what I'm interested in could relate to this, so perhaps that I can do that. Next slide, please. And so we know future farms throughout the US have a very IT perspective. Whether we're talking about the agrobots, which literally, can go and clear the earth, drop the seed in, close it up, water it, fertilize it, et cetera, et cetera. The cows that are fitted with chips so that you can know where they are and how much they've eaten and where it is, et cetera. We know that at the corporate commercial level, yes, this is the future of farms. To some extent, for the small farm, some of this is accessible. One of the things that we're discussing right now, we submitted a proposal to the Columbus Foundation to have a prototype um, solar tree put on the Mamie Mac garden to be able to provide electricity, because water and electricity are two of the major problems facing community gardens in most municipal areas. Because if you're using a lot from the land bank, generally you do not have access to water or electricity from the property on either side or adjacent to that land bank property. And so and it's it's $4,000 to $6,000 minimum to install water and or electricity, connecting it to municipal services. And again, that's not money that many community gardens have. So we're looking to develop a prototype of a tree, which is a single stem, and then there are 3 to 4 leaves on it that rotate according to the sun and generate electricity down to the bank, and they will provide electricity for the area. So if we're able to get the prototype funded and then it works for maybe Mac, then we will look at getting it funded for other community gardens in Columbus. So there are small IT applications that are very appropriate for small gardens. And so we have to be able to look creatively and then look at how we can get, such applications funded. Next, please. But unfortunately, we know that for most African American communities, we're looking at a history of gardening where there's been a consistent decrease of access to the land. And there's a lot of discussion right now in terms of whether or not there's a current lawsuit that's been filed against USDA that's blocking the distribution of funds that have been provided for African Americans specifically to have access to the land. And that was because there's been, I mentioned John Mitchell before, and he really had to fight to become head of the Southern District of the USDA Extension Services. And he really had to fight a lot of the bureaucracy and the regulations that really prohibited African Americans being able to utilize fully the services provided by the extension services. And so from a lot of small things like telling people, the application wasn't filled out correctly and seeing them back 4 or 5 times and then saying, oh, we're sorry, you missed the deadline. Why didn't you bring it in on time? To people really having their land being taken from them, literally in the middle of the night, by larger landowners who simply wanted it. We know that the loss of Black land has been systematic. And so it's not enough just to be smart in terms of IT. We have to be smart in terms of how we connect the dots so that we have a strong, resilient community as we go forward. Next, please. And that is the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julialynne. There's so much there, and it's like I can't believe 45 minutes has already gone by with all the information that you've covered. If folks have questions, please go ahead and type it in the chat or the Q&A. If you're watching on Facebook, feel free to make a comment or ask a question there. I'm kind of monitoring that with my phone. I was actually taking notes while you were presenting, because there's so much really good things going on. One thing is like on the previous slide here, one thing that like really struck me is like obviously family, right? And that the generational passed down to your children, and with the policies that have been in place with targeting African American farms and things like that, it severs that thing where it's like, like here, like that little girl looks like she's so happy to be there, and like I'm hoping that like that is something where we're able to turn the tide, where it's like those African American farms that are there now are there in the future, and there's a way to kind of grow that. And sounds like that lawsuit might be something where we kind of stem the tide with that. but just how it brings families together. It, I like how you mentioned how, it's almost one individual is doing their own thing, but what you do is you connect that individual to the community, of gardening, and they grow as a person, they grow as a gardener because, we all could learn. Not all of us know everything about gardening, and so when you're making those connections and you're meeting your neighbor, like, wait a minute, you live 2 houses down, you live a block away, and you're doing this. I should try it. It really does bring the community together, and it's almost like it's the connection. It's the connection. It's growing it. It's letting them know the whole community is there and supporting one another. The one slide you had of I just remember she was one of the bugs, I think you said, where she was using her skills in the construction industry and lending that to help build some of the boxes. And like, you never know, like, what your neighbors, if what skills they have. And this is a great way to kind of find that out. I loved how the one planter there had seats installed from the beginning, because like I think we've all been out to like a community garden or gardens in general, and they're like, there's nowhere to sit. I can only stand for so long. So I really appreciated that, the thinking of that. And if somebody is in the district and they're looking to get involved more in this, maybe they don't know about it, should they contact you directly there at the info@bronzevillegrowersmarket.com? And then you might have said, and I apologize if you did, but with the growers market, you had mentioned that you all hold events. Is that throughout the summer? I know last year was on hold because of COVID, but is that picking up again this year?
Yes, we've actually started, and we're every Thursday from 3 to 6 p.m. at 17th and Mount Vernon. And so we will meet this Thursday, and we continue until September 30th. And if you follow us on Facebook, we have different activities. We will have a plant swap. Don't remember the exact date now. We've got a kidpreneur day where we've got youth, again, looking at some of the agricultural careers, but others. So we want to have youth come in and just, talk about some of the things that they're doing. And we will observe the National Farmers Market a week in the first week of August. So every Thursday from here on. Last week, people were like, oh, it's going to rain, but we were out there. This week, it looks like it's going to rain, but we'll be out there and we'll see what we can do. And
That's
the
awesome.
prices are very, very reasonable.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And the other thing I love about what you're doing is that you don't let obstacles get in your way. So when people are like, I want to garden, but I don't want to get dirty, you're like, okay, we can handle that. Let's think about it a little bit differently. And it brought people in. It's very inclusive, regardless of the obstacles, regardless of your knowledge level with that. So I don't know. I don't see any questions on Facebook here or in the chat, but we're just about out of time. But I wanted to see if you had any last words of wisdom for us.
Well, just want to say that sometimes people say, well, does it really make that much difference? And I want to assure people that it does. And there are various studies, one particularly on Cleveland, other cities. I don't know one on Columbus specifically, but in Cleveland, I think it was like something like 40 to 70% of the produce that is eaten within Cleveland could be grown by the community gardens. And then something, again, almost like 100, and I was shocked, it was like 100% of the honey eaten in Cleveland could be grown. I was like, they've got that many bees, but, so yes, when we look at the network of land and we look at the intensity of the development and the, people using season extension, and this is Ohio is 3 seasons. And in fact, right now, one of the discussions that I'm having with the bugs is, yes, it's hot and this is what you wanted, it bolted and you're not getting your nice lettuce and, but take it out and the summer's not over. Now it's time to begin to plant for your fall crops. And so And some of the seeds you may not want to put directly in the ground. Find a shady area, get your seeds started. And then in about 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to put those in. And so you can have crops up until November. I've actually taken kale and collard greens up to January when it was, somewhat mild. And certainly Thanksgiving, many Thanksgivings, I've had greens from the garden. So it really is possible to grow 3 seasons when you plan, and it is possible to make a difference overall in terms of sheer volume if we do it correctly. So it needs to be encouraged, but part of the issue remains the municipal legislation. And we have to begin to address that. I mentioned earlier, there was discussion about 2 months ago around the urban forest within, Columbus and what to do about it. But there are other things. One of the regulations that has come before the city council within the past 2 weeks has been establishing a farm stand on residential property. And this means that you can grow in your backyard and sell in your front. So that that becomes very good for people who do want to make some income off of their produce, but don't have enough to sell to an establishment that's looking for larger amounts of produce and doesn't have the resources to become established at a farmer's market. Now, we say you can come for 1 week and that's fine. Other markets say that they really want a minimum amount of time or you have to pay a vendor fee. And so we also want to encourage legislation that allows produce to be grown in front yards. And I know many communities and some of the more formal ones, condo associations, that kind of thing, really prohibit and the length of the grass. I mean, it's told you have to grow grass and it can not be any taller than this, and you can only have flowers in a certain place. So some people are really prohibited by institutional or municipal rules and regulations that prohibit the growing of food in the best place. If that's where the sun is, then that's where the food should be grown. So we have to be able to step back from a policy position and say, who can possibly help us address some of these issues? Who are our allies to be able to change some of these issues? And then how do we get the information disseminated in a way that becomes most useful for the community as a whole?
Absolutely. We do have one question that they asked about the presentation. Can it be shared? And I know that it's being recorded, so we're going to put that on the city's YouTube page. It's on GreenSpot social media and Facebook now. We'll also have it on the GreenSpot website. For folks who want to see you speak, like hopefully this year, we'll actually get to see people in person a little bit more. How can they follow you to learn about other speaking engagements that you might have coming up for the public?
Again, always email the info@BrownsvilleGrowersMarket.com, or you can text me 614-214-6277, or just follow Facebook.
Awesome. I want to thank you again, Julialynne, for this. This has been very eye-opening and very cool how you've taken that individual action of gardening and connected people and created this community of gardeners that learn from one another and really is inspiring. Hopefully other places start doing that as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed doing it.